Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 28, in which Passepartout could not succeed in making anyone listen to reason. The train leaving Great Salt Lake and the station at Ogden rose for an hour towards the north as far as Weaver River, and having accomplished about 900 miles from San Francisco, leaving this point it resumed the easterly direction across the rocky hills of Wasatch Mountains. It is in this part of the territory that comprise between these mountains and the Rocky Mountains properly so called, the American engineers were caught in the greatest difficulties. On this portion of the route, the subsidy of the United States government was raised to $48,000 per mile, whilst on the plains it was only $16,000. But the engineers, having already been said, could not done violence to nature, and they had played with her, going round the difficulties. To reach the great basins, only one tunnel, 14,000 feet long, was bored into the entire route of the railroad. At Salt Lake, the road had been up to this time at the greatest altitude, and from this point its profile described a very long curve, descending towards the Bitter Creek Valley, and reascending to the dividing ridges of the water between the Atlantic and the Pacific. The creeks were numerous in this region, and it was necessary to cross the Muddy and the Green and the others of the culvers. Passepartout became more impatient in the proportion as he approached the end of his journey. Fix, in his turn, would have been very glad to get out of this rough country. He feared delays, he dreaded accident, and was more of a hurry than Phileas Fogg himself had set upon on the English soil. And at 10 o'clock at night, the train stopped at Fort and Bridger Station, in which it left almost immediately. 20 miles farther, it entered Wyoming territory, and following the entire valley of the Bitter Creek, whence a proportion of the streams forming a water system of Colorado. The next day, the 7th of December, there was a stop of a quarter hour at the Green River station, and the snow had fallen quite heavily on the night, but it mingled with the rain and half melted so it could not interfere with the progress of the train. But this bad weather kept Passepartout in constant uneasiness, and from the accumulation of the snow clogging on the car wheels would have certainly endangered the journey. What an idea, he said to himself, for my master to travel during the winter! Could he not wait for the fine season of the year to increase his chances? But at this moment, while the good fellow was busy on the condition of the sky, and the lowering of temperature, Mrs. Otter was experiencing more serious fears, which proceeded from quite another cause. Some of the passengers had gotten out of the car and were walking on the platform of the Green River station, waiting for the train to leave. A young woman, looking through the window pane, recognized among them Colonel Stamp Proctor, an American who behaved so rudely to Phileas Fogg that at the time of the political meeting in San Francisco, Miss Ouda, not wishing to be seen, drew back from the window. This circumstance made a lively impression on the young woman, which she was attached to the man who, however coldly, gave her everyday tokens of the most absolute devotion. She was doubtless did not comprehend the entire depth of the sentiment which her deliverer inspired in her, and to this sentiment she gave as yet the only name of gratitude, both unknown to herself and more than that, and her heart was therefore wrung at the sight of this rough fellow whom Mr. Fogg would, sooner or later, demand satisfaction. Evidently it was a chance alone that had brought Colonel Proctor into this train, but he was there, and Phileas Fogg must be prevented at any cost from seeing his adversary. When the train started again, Mrs. Ouda took advantage for a moment, when Mr. Fogg was sleeping, to post Fix and Passepartout into the situation. "That Proctor is on the train!" cried Fix. "Well, compose yourself, madame. Before dealing with the gentleman, with Mr. Fogg, you'll have to deal with me. It seems to me that all this business I've received in the greatest insult. And moreover," added Passepartout, "I will take care of him, colonel as he is." Mr. Fix replied, Mrs. Ouda, "Mr. Fogg will allow no one to avenge him, and he has said that he will return to America to find this ruffian. If he sees Colonel Proctor, we cannot prevent an encounter, which may lead to deplorable results, and he must therefore not see him." "You are right, madame," replied Fox. "An encounter might ruin everything." Conqueror of conqueror, Mr. Fogg must be delayed, and, replied Passepartout, that that would win the bet of the gentlemen of the Reform Club. In 4 days we shall be in New York. Well, then, if my master does not leave his car for 4 days, we hope that any chance will not put him face to face with this cursed American. Confound him! Now, we can easily prevent him." The conversation was interrupted, and Mr. Fogg had wakened up. He looked about the country, and, through the window pane, obscured the snow. But later, without being heard of his master or Miss Ouda, Passepartout said to the detective, "Will you truly fight for him?" I will do anything to take him back to Europe alive, simply replied Fix, in a tone which indicated an unbroken will. Passepartout felt a shudder over him, but his convictions as to the honesty of his master were not weakened. And now, were by any means that Mr. Fogg could have detained in this car, as to prevent any encounter between him and the Colonel, that could not have been difficult, as the gentleman himself was not naturally excitable or inquisitive. By all events, the detective found he had this means for a few moments. He had later said to Phileas Fogg, "These are long and slow hours, and we must pass on the railway." "Indeed they are," replied the gentleman, "but they pass." "Aboard the steamer," replied the detective, "you used to take a turn at whist." "Yes," replied Phileas Fogg, "but here it would be difficult. I neither have cars nor partners." "Oh, as for the cars, it would be easy to buy them. They are sold on the trains of America, and for partners, if perchance, madam." "Certainly, sir," replied the young one quickly. "I understand whist, and that is part of the English education." "And I," continued Fix, "have some pretensions for playing a good game. Now with us, three in a dummy." "As you please, sir," replied Fix, delighted at resuming his favourite game, even on the railroad. Passepartout was dispatched in search of a steward. He soon returned with two complete deck of cards, counters, and a shelf covered with cloth. Nothing was wanting, and the game commenced between Mrs. Auda understood whilst well enough, and she was even complimented sometimes by the severe Mr. Phileas Fogg. As for the detective, he was simply adept, and worthy of holding his head up with this gentleman. "Now," replied Passepartout to himself, "we will keep him. He will not budge any more." At 11 o'clock in the morning, the train had reached the dividing ridges of the water in the two oceans. It was at the Bridger Pass, in the height of 11,524 English feet above the level of sea, one of the highest points touched by the profile of the route. In this passage across the Rocky Mountains, it is going about 200 miles, and the travellers finally found themselves on the vast plains extending as far as the Atlantic, in which the nature made it so propitious for laying a railroad. On the slopes of the Atlantic basin appeared the streams, tributaries, and North Platte River, and the entire northern and the eastern horizon was covered by immense semicircular curtains, which formed the southern portion of the Rocky Mountains. The high being Emery Peak, and between this curve the line of the road extended vast and plentifully, and the watered plains on the right on the road rose for the first spurs of the mountainous mass. Rounding off the south as far as the sources of Arkansas River, one of the largest tributaries of Mississippi, and at 12:30 the travelers caught a sight for an instant of Fort Halleck, which commands in this country. A few hours more and the crossing of the Rocky Mountains would be accomplished, and it was to be hoped then if no accident would mark the passage of the train through this difficult region. The snow had stopped falling, and the weather had become cold and dry. Large birds, frightened by the locomotive, were flying in the distance. Not a deer, not a bear, nor a wolf showed itself in the plain. It was desert in all its bareness. After all, a very comfortable breakfast served up in the car. Mr. Fogg and his partners had just resumed their interminable whist, and the sharp whistles were heard. The train stopped. Passepartout put his head out the door and saw nothing which could explain the stop. No station was in sight. Mrs. Alden and Fix feared for an instant that Mr. Fogg might was thinking going on out to the track, but the gentleman contented himself with saying to his servant, "See then what it is." Passepartout rushed out of the car. About 40 passengers had left their seat. Among them was Colonel Stamp Proctor. The train had stopped in front of a red signal which blocked the way. An engineer and conductor, having gotten out, discussed quite steadily with the signalman, whom the station master at Medicine Bow, the next station, had sent in advance of the train. Some of the passengers approached and took part in the discussion, and many others effusated Colonel Proctor with his loud voice and imperious gestures. Passepartout, having rejoined the group, heard the signalman saying, "No, there is no means of passing. The bridge at Medicine Bow is shaking and will not bear the weight of the train." The bridge in question was a suspension bridge over the rapids, about a mile from the place where the train had stopped. According to the signalman, it threatened to fall, and several of the wires snapped. It was impossible to risk its passage. He did not exaggerate in any way, then, in asserting that there could not be passed over the bridge, and besides, with the careless habits of Americans, we say that when they are prudent, they will be very foolish not to be so. Passepartout, not daring to go inform his master, listened with set teeth, immovable as a statue. Ah, indeed, cried Colonel Proctor, we are not going. I imagine to remain here and take the route in the snow. Colonel, replied the conductor, we have telegraphed to Omaha for a train. It is not possible that we will arrive in the Medicine Bow before 6 hours. 6 hours, without a doubt, replied the conductor, and besides, the time will be necessary for us to reach the St. on foot. And it is only a mile from here? A mile, in fact, but the other side of the river. The cannot the river be crossed by a boat? Impossible. The creek is swollen with the rains. It is torrent, and be compelled to make a detour of 10 miles to the north to find a ford. The colonel launched into a volley of oaths, blaming the company and the conductor, and the passepartout, furious from not joining with him, was a material obstacle against which his master's banknotes would be no avail. Disappointment was among those passengers, who, without counting delay, saw them obliged to foot 50 miles with plain covered with snow. The hubbub, exclamations loud and deep, would have certainly attracted Phileas Fogg's attention, but if that gentleman had not absorbed in this game, Passepartout found himself compelled to inform him, and with a drooping head he turned towards the car. An engineer of the train, a genuine Yankee named Forster, raising his voice, said, "Gentlemen, there may be a way of passing." "On the bridge?" asked the passenger. "On the bridge." "With our train?" "With our train." Passepartout stopped and devoured at the engineer's words. "But the bridge threatens to fall," continued the conductor. "It doesn't matter," replied Forster. "I believe that rushing the train over at its maximum speed will have some chances of passing." "The devil!" exclaimed Passepartout. But a certain number of passengers were immediately carried away by the proposition. It pleased Colonel Proctor particularly. That hothead found it very feasible. He recalled that even engineers that had the idea of passing rivers without bridges, the trains closely coupled, rushing at the height of their speed, etc. And finally all those took side with the engineer's view. "We have 50 chances for passing," said one. 60, 80, 90 out of 100. Passepartout was perplexed. He was willing to try anything to accomplish the passage of Medicine Creek, but the attempt seemed a little too American. Besides, he thought, there's much simpler thing to do, and these people don't even think of it. Monsieur, he replied to one, the way proposed by the engineer seems a bit hasty, authority to me, but 80 chances, said passenger, turning his back to him. I know very well, replied Passepartout, addressing a about a simple reflection. No reflection, it is useless, replied the American addressed, since the engineer assures us that we will pass. Without doubt, continued Passepartout, we will pass, but perhaps it would be more prudent. What prudent? Cried Colonel Proctor, jumping at this word heard. At full speed, you have been told. Don't you understand? At full speed. I know, I understand, repeated Passepartout. No one will allow to finish this phrase, but it would be, if not more prudent, since the words offend you, at least more natural. Who? What? Who? What? How? What is the matter with this fellow? Kurt was heard from all this direction, and the poor fellow did not know who to address. Are you afraid? Asked Colonel Proctor. I, afraid? Cried Passepartout. Well, so be it. I will show these people that a Frenchman can be as American as they say. All aboard! All aboard! Cried the conductor. Yes, all aboard, replied Passepartout. All aboard and right away. But they can't prevent me from thinking that it would be much more natural as from gone over the bridge afoot, than bring the train afterwards. No one heard the sage reflection. No one acknowledged its justness. The passengers took their seats again in the cars, and Passepartout resumed his without a saying of what had occurred. The players were entirely absorbed in their games, and the locomotive whisked vigorously. The engineer reversed its engine and backed for about a mile, and returned like a jumper who is going to take a leap. Then, to a second whistle, they commenced to move forwards. The speed increased. It soon became frightful. But a single puffing was heard from the locomotive, and the pistons worked 20 strokes a second. The axles smoked in the journals. They felt, so to speak, that the entire train, moving about a rate of 100 miles an hour, did not bear upon the rails. Speed destroyed the weight, and they passed. It was like a flash of lightning. They saw nothing on the bridge. The train leaped, it might be said, from the one bank to another. The engineer could not stop his train for 5 miles beyond the station. But the train had scarcely crossed the river than the bridge, already about to fall, went down and crashed into the rapids of the Medicine Bow.